Oh, thank you, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be with you. This is my first time in Scandinavia, and I've had an amazing week here. I was just telling someone, I am dead tired now, though. You people have worn me out. I'm feeling it in my legs, and I'm feeling it in my heart, you know. But I'm really happy, and it's been wonderful to share Jesus with you, and to not just give, but to receive from you. I was talking to my wife last night, and I told her, I said, I feel like this is one of those trips where I've received maybe more than I've given, you know. All these little amazing things have happened this week, and so it's been a really refreshing time for me, and so I just want to thank you for that. I will tell you one funny little story. My wife and I, we have 4 children, River, Seth, Magnolia, and then Rowan. And Rowan is my little guy. He's 4 years old, and he's much younger than the rest of them. He was sort of an accident. We didn't plan on him. And I asked Heather last night, I said, hey, how are the kids? Everybody okay? And she's like, yeah, everybody's great. Rowan scored goals in his soccer game today. And, you know, Maggie went to a friend's, and then River worked and went skateboarding, and Seth has been asleep all day. So everybody was good. And she said, Rowan, one funny thing happened today. She said, I was taking a shower. So she was in the bathroom, she's taking a shower. And Rowan is on the couch watching TV, and our bedroom is kind of like back in the hall a little bit. And Heather said she gets out of the shower and she can hear Rowan watching TV, and then she hears Magnolia come down the stairs. And Maggie's saying, Mom, where are you at? Mom, where's you at? Mom, where are you at? And then Rowan finally quits watching TV, and he looks at Magnolia and he says, oh yeah, she's dead. And then Heather said, I yelled from the other room, I'm not dead, I'm right here. And then Rowan says, oh yeah, she's right there. Just another day at the Russell house. Hey, I want to share with you a message this morning out of Luke chapter 19. Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 9. And if we can put that up, and I'll just read this to you this morning. It goes like this. Is it going to be up there all the way? Or is it going to go a little bit at a time? Let me just grab my Bible. How about that? Is that okay? I have one. Luke chapter 19, it goes like this. Chapter 19, verse 1 through 9 says this. Jesus entered Jericho, and he made his way through town. And there was a man there named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector in that region, and he had become very rich. He tried to get a look at Jesus, but he was too short to see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and he climbed a sycamore fig tree beside the road, for Jesus was going to pass by that way. And when Jesus came by, he looked up at Zacchaeus and he called him by name. Zacchaeus, he said, come down, I must be a guest in your house today. Zacchaeus quickly calmed down, and he took Jesus to his house in great excitement and joy. But the people were displeased. He's gone to be with the guest of a notorious sinner, they grumbled. Meanwhile, Zacchaeus stood before the Lord and said, I will give half my wealth to the poor, Lord, and if I've cheated people on their taxes, I will give them back 4 times as much. And Jesus responded, salvation has come to this home today, for this man has shown himself to be a true son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save those who are lost. Famous story. But before we get into it, I just want to tell you what I've been thinking about lately. This is what I've been sort of thinking about in my own, quiet time and prayer time with Jesus. I've been thinking about this idea. I've been thinking about the fact that Jesus is God, you know, and we all kind of know that. Probably most of us here believe that. And not only have I been thinking about Jesus as God, but I've been thinking about some of what that means. And it's none of it's a surprise. I've been thinking about the fact that Jesus is a good person, you know, and that Jesus is a consistent person, meaning that he doesn't change Like if a new group comes around, Jesus is the same Jesus around these people as he would be around those people. Anybody here know someone who like changes when the group of people changes? Yeah, Jesus doesn't do that. Like Jesus is consistent. Like if he were here with us this morning, he'd be the same Jesus as he would be if he were, downstairs with the children. It's just Jesus. He's consistent. And if he were with sinners, he'd be the same Jesus. And if he were at church, he'd be the same Jesus. And so I've been thinking about how Jesus is good, and I've been thinking about how Jesus is consistent in his character and he has integrity. And I've been thinking about how he's kind and all the qualities of Jesus. And I've also been thinking about the fact that Jesus is holy, I've been thinking about how, like, Jesus is holy. And he's holy because he's God's son and all of these things. And holy is this word that means, like, set apart, And sometimes in church, we do the math like, well, I want to be holy. I want to be set apart for God. And so sometimes, maybe not in Denmark, but at least in the United States, sometimes it comes across as, well, I'm going to be holy, and so I'm not going to be with those people, And in fact, we wear it as a badge, I'm a holy person, and I don't associate with those people. I don't associate with bad people, whatever that is. But I've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about the fact that Jesus has gravity. You know how the sun in our solar system has gravity and the planets just find their orbit around it? I've been thinking about how Jesus has gravity. And even though Jesus is good, even though Jesus is perfect, even though Jesus is holy, even though he's God's son, even though he's consistent and never changes, I've been thinking about this. That it isn't just good people who are attracted to Jesus, but that Jesus has this kind of gravity and he pulls in bad people, like the worst people. Like you can read the Gospels, and what's really insane to me is that the worst people are attracted to Jesus. And oftentimes it's the pastors who didn't like him. That makes me afraid. Anybody here a pastor? Martin? Be afraid. Jesus is holy, he is perfect, he is good, he is consistent, he does not change, and somehow he is attractive to the people who are on the margins of society. They like him, they want to be around him, Prostitutes and sinners were attracted to Jesus. In the United States, sometimes we do the math like this, holiness means to be set apart, so I'm not going to be with those people. And we use this idea to sort of create a definition of holiness that means get away from. But Jesus' holiness drew those people in. And so I've been thinking, man, I need to be like Jesus. I want to be the sort of person who is consistent and is good, but for people who are sinners and for people who are far away from God and for people who might not believe in God and for people who struggle with all kinds of things, people who struggle with addiction, people who struggle with anger, people who struggle with anything that a person can struggle with, I want to be the sort of person that rather than being repelled from me, they're attracted to me. That's how Jesus is. I'll tell you another story. I'm like an atheist magnet. Basically, if there's an atheist within 15 kilometers, he'll find me, I don't have to do anything. I'll tell you a really funny story. I was in New York City. Last summer. I got invited to this gathering of pastors. I didn't know anyone there. It was a great event. Completely outside of the circle of ministry that I'm involved in. I have no idea how this man found out about me, but he said, hey, I'll pay for you to come to New York City if you'll come and share a little bit because we're going to make this thing happen and blah, 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 blah. I went to New York City. What a great town, right? I went to New York, and for 3 days, I just met people left and right. I just was meeting people, but I'm kind of an introvert. And so after 3 days of meeting people, I thought, I got to get out of here. And so I skipped a meeting. I just blew a meeting off, and I thought I'm going to go to this art museum that I've been wanting to go to down next to the financial district in Manhattan because it's the Whitney Museum, and the Whitney Museum is all contemporary American art, and I'd never been there. And they had an Edward Hopper like display out, and so they were putting all the Edward Hopper paintings up. Do you guys know the Edward Hopper? Yeah, just beautiful paintings. Yes, come on, high five. Okay, so I'm going to go down there. I just had to get away from people. And so I was going to ride the subway, And I get on the subway, and I know the rules of the subway. And the rules of the subway in New York, maybe it's the same here in Copenhagen, but the rules of the subway in New York are this. It's the same rules as the rules of dealing with the male silverback gorilla. Never make eye contact. Did you guys grow up watching nature shows? Yeah. It's David Attenborough. Never make eye contact with the male silverback gorilla. So same as on the subway. Don't look at anyone. Just like put your head down and keep your mouth shut. That's what you do in New York City when you're on the subway. So that's what I'm doing. I put my headphones in. I'm not looking at anyone. And I'm looking at my phone and I'm listening to this song, and you know how you can feel when somebody is looking at you? And then the guy pokes me. He says, "What are you listening to?" And I told him what I'm listening to, and we talk about music for a minute. And then he says, "Well, what do you do?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "What do you do for a living?" And like pastors, we never want to say, "I'm a pastor," Especially in New York City. I was like, man, I'm a pastor. He's like, "Oh, I have huge problems with the church." I'm like, "This is great. I do too." And he was like, "Yeah, I don't believe any of that stuff, And he's like, "I have huge problems with the church." And so we spent the train ride down just talking about like problems that people have with the church. And what's funny is everything he brought up, I just agreed with him. I'm like, "I think that sucks too. I don't know. I mean, that's horrible. Yeah. That makes me angry, And then he's like, I don't believe in God. I don't believe anything, And so we talked about church for a while, and then we talked about that. And I, at the end, I said, "Hey, can I just quickly pray for you?" And he was like, "Yeah, by the way, I've met so many atheists in my life. Never had one turn down prayer. Isn't that interesting, right? Hey, can I pray for you really quickly?" "Yeah, it'd be great. God, just come." Yeah, on the subway. "Hey, God, just come and meet him wherever he's at. Like, this was a divine appointment. Let them continue." And then I get off. I go and I look at beautiful art. Then I get back on the subway. Same thing. Just put my head down, put my hood up, earbuds in. Like all the signs are there. Don't talk to me, right? Then this guy standing in front of me, I can feel his eyes, and I look up, and he's like, hey. I said, "What?" He's like, "Are you lost?" I'm like, I don't know. He's like, you just didn't look like you knew what you were doing. I'm like, I probably don't, but I think I'm going to get off in like 7 stops. He's like, "Oh, I just wanted to make sure you were okay." So, now, where I'm from, we assume that New Yorkers are like the meanest people, right? But everywhere I went, it was just kindness. So I'm talking to this guy, and then he says, "Well, what do you do?" I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I said, "I'm a pastor." He goes, "I have huge problems with the church." Yeah. I'm like, this is great. This is great. I'm like, "I do too." And then he goes, "Yeah, but I go to church every day." I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, I don't believe any of it, but I go to church every day." I'm like, "All right, tell me about that." He's like, "Well," he goes, "I go to church every day." And I said, "You don't believe any of it? What do you mean you don't believe any of it?" He goes, "I don't believe in God. I don't believe anything." And I said, "Well, why are you going to church?" He goes, "Well, I like communion." He goes, "I go to Catholic Mass every single morning before I go to church, before I go to work." And I said, "Well, why? Why do you?" He goes, "I love communion." I said, "Well, why do you love communion? Why are you you don't believe any of it? Why are you going?" He goes, I love the idea that we all stand in line and everybody gets the same thing." I'm crying. I'm like, that's literally the best thing I've heard in 6 months, right? Yeah. Doesn't believe in God, doesn't believe in the church, But he loves communion because at the end of Catholic Mass, everyone stands up. They make a line and every single person comes to the priest and everyone gets the same bit of bread and the same bit of wine. And it doesn't matter if you're rich or if you're poor. It doesn't matter if you're in or if you're out. It doesn't matter if you're good or you're bad. It doesn't matter if you're gay or you're straight. Every single person in that line gets the same thing. I got so touched in my heart. I looked at him, I said, hey, you are not far from the kingdom of heaven. Gave him a high five and I got off the train, you know. Then the Holy Spirit spoke to me. He says, Adam, this kind of stuff it's just going to be coming and going, you know. This is going to happen to you coming and going. And it always has. Those are one little story that's an inkling of what I'm hoping to lean into more. People who are far from us being attracted to us. Like, I couldn't set that up. How many of you know you can't just go talk to atheists about their issues with church sometimes, but that you need the Holy Spirit to help you, and that hopefully there's something inside of you that is saying to them, oh, that's a safe person over there, you know? I don't have this down, but I'm trying to get this Jesus thing down, you know? I want to live a consistent, good, and holy life. I want to honor God, and at the same time, for people who are far away from Him, I want to be attractive. I want them to see something in me. I want to have gravity like Jesus had gravity. And so we read this passage this morning, which is an odd little story. Odd little story about Jesus and Zacchaeus. And by the way, this little story in Luke, it only happens in Luke. And for that reason, it's disproportionately famous. It has a song. Do you guys know the little song about Zacchaeus here in Denmark? You don't know? In America, it's very famous. Everybody knows all the little kids sing the song. Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. Yeah, everyone knows this song. People who don't like Jesus know this song, you know? So it's disproportionately famous. It's only in one gospel. It has this song, you know, and there's all these other moments in the gospels that are way more famous and there is no song for them, you know? The feeding of the 5,000 is in all four gospels, but it doesn't have a song, you know? And then there's other really famous moments that happen in a lot of the gospels, you know, the Gadarene demoniac, you know, where Jesus cast all the devils out of the one guy and they go into the pig. There's not a song. If there was a song for that, it would be Norwegian black metal, you know? It'd be my name is Legion. You know, I don't know. This is how my brain works. Walking on water, the whole thing, no song, but this one does. And so I've been thinking a little while about this passage. I've been thinking, what would make a person climb a tree, you know? What would make a person climb a tree to see Jesus? Or what would make a person just climb a tree in general? And how many of you know that little kids will climb a tree for no reason, just because it's fun, right? But what would make a man or make a woman, like an adult, climb a tree? I've been thinking really hard about it. I've settled on this, and I think there's only 4 reasons that people will climb trees. I'd like to share those with you this morning. Number 1, to hang up a hammock. That was the first. Number 2, to get your kid's kite out of the tree. At Easter, we have a little tradition in our house. The kids get a little Easter basket, and there's little presents in there or something, you know. So this year, my wife gave all the kids a kite. We have a big grassy front yard, and our vineyard is over on one side. And there's precisely one tree in my yard. And so I tell my kids, I told Rowan, I don't know, 187 times, hey, it's windy today. You can fly your kite. Just don't go by the tree. 30 seconds later, he takes the kite right into the tree, you know. I'm climbing a tree. Why do you climb trees? You hang up a hammock, and then maybe to get your kid's kite out. In Kentucky, we're rednecks. Do you all know that? Do you guys know that term here? Yes. Do you guys have rednecks in Denmark? Yes. You know what I found? They're everywhere. Rednecks are everywhere. Okay, rednecks climb trees. Do you know why rednecks climb trees? To shoot animals. So every single year, my sons and I, we climb a tree and we shoot a deer, and then we eat it. And then the 4th reason you'd climb a tree is you maybe climb a tree to run away from a bear. But then my son told me that bears climb trees. Anyway, I guess I'm just being a little silly right now, only because if an adult is climbing a tree, I think we all understand something's going on there, you know? And so this Zacchaeus guy, he's doing something extreme. There's something about Jesus that is so attractive that he'll do whatever it takes to get a glimpse of who he is. And so he's up that tree. Well, the Bible also tells us a couple things about Zacchaeus. It tells us that he was the chief tax collector. And that's really important, because that means he wasn't just the tax collector. He was the tax collector of the tax collectors, you know? And the Jews didn't like the tax. Well, no one likes the tax collector, you know? The Beatles song, Tax Man. But no one likes tax collectors, but especially the Jews didn't like it because, well, they were living in Israel, and a long time ago in the Old Testament, God told them, well, this is your land and I'm giving it to you. And then Romans came in and were like, where's your God now? You know? And they were like, you can stay here, but you have to pay us taxes. And this is what the tax guy would do. The tax guy would have a responsibility to extract so much taxes from the people. And then if he wanted to extract some more, he could keep it for himself. You know? And then the chief tax collector, well, he could extort more for himself. So he's taking not only a little bit from the people, but he's taking a cut from the guys who have also taken a cut from the people. They become extremely wealthy. And so everyone in the area would have hated this guy. Not just because he was taking their money and giving it to Rome, but because he was also extorting them for his own personal gain, right? And because of this, he becomes isolated. So people didn't like tax collectors. They were extortionists. And so Zacchaeus climbs a tree. And you have to understand, this moment when Zacchaeus climbs the tree, it would have been hilarious and it would have been a little bit humbling, because guys didn't wear pants back then. So you're taking a risk. And you have to ask yourself, well, why is he climbing the tree? Well, the Bible also tells us that he was short. But I don't believe that he was just climbing that tree because he was short. I think it had more to do with the fact that he had been extorting money from everybody in that region. And Jesus is coming by. And how many of you know that even short people can weasel their way through a crowd and get up front, right? But the crowd is disallowing him. I think that's what's really going on. I think people in the crowd are saying, nope, not today, Zacchaeus. Not today. And so they disallow him. And so he gets up a tree in order to get a better view. And so he does this desperate thing. He does this desperate thing to see Jesus. And you know what? This is what I love about it. Zacchaeus does this desperate thing to see Jesus. And Jesus sees him in that tree. And what that tells me is that Jesus sees desperate people. You know, there's something about Jesus that calls out to Zacchaeus, even though he isn't a righteous man, even though he isn't a holy man, even though he isn't a good guy. But there's something about Jesus that's attractive to him, and he does this desperate thing, and he climbs a tree, and Jesus sees him. You know, Jesus sees desperate people. The story right before this one that we just read is the story of Jesus coming into town, and there's this blind guy on the side of the road. And the blind guy starts yelling, screaming out, "Son of David, don't pass me by." And Jesus heard that guy and saw him too. He was desperate. And Jesus says, well, what do you want? He says, I want to see. And he says, okay, your faith has healed you. And he regains his sight. And then the next story is Zacchaeus. Both of these stories are about people who can't see, right? And both of these stories are about people who are desperate. And both of these stories are stories in which Jesus sees the desperate person. You know, if there's anybody here this morning who's desperate, here's the good news. Jesus sees you. He knows you. And your desperation, it isn't off-putting to Jesus. If you're desperate, Jesus sees you. Here's the other thing I know about desperation. This is the point in the sermon when a lot of pastors would tell a church like this, oh, you guys got to get desperate. Get desperate for Jesus, you know. I've been to those meetings. I've been to Pentecostal meetings. Like, get desperate for God. Cry out for Jesus. How many of you know that you cannot manufacture desperation? I've tried. It doesn't work, you know. It doesn't work. So I want to talk to you two ways here just for a moment. Number one, if you're desperate, you need to know the good news is that Jesus sees you. And this morning, if you're not desperate, it's okay. You can't manufacture desperation. Don't manufacture desperation. It'll make you a fake person. All right? it'll make you a fake person. And so you think, well, what should I do? If I don't feel that desperate, what should I do? Oh, here's the message. Be like Jesus and start seeing desperate people. You can't manufacture desperation. But everybody in the room, we can have our eyes open to desperate people. Here's what I believe. I believe there's probably a person who's up a tree in your life right now. You probably don't even have to think that hard. In fact, now that I've said it, you already know who they are. You want to be like Jesus? See them. And I love what it says in the Gospels here. It says that Jesus calls him by name. Do you know the thing that's in every human heart? The desire that's in every human heart is to have Jesus see you and to call you by your name. Yeah. Begin to see desperate people. The other thing I love about this story is sort of messes with our understandings of the kind of people that Jesus is into. Do you guys have the phrase here in Denmark, down and out? People who are at the bottom. In the United States, we have this little phrase, like if you're not doing good, we might say you're down and out. You know, you're not, everything's going wrong. You're down and out, you know, you're not in the game, and it's not up and to the right, you know, it's down and out. Yeah, the thing I love about this story is that Jesus is sort of like flipping things upside down. Everybody in the room knows that Jesus is with and he is for the down and out. You know, if you're poor, Jesus is on your side. If you're alone, Jesus is on your side. You know, Jesus says in Matthew 25, if you visit the sick, if you visit the prisoner, if you clothe the naked, and if you give some water to the thirsty, well, you did it for him. Why? Because he's with the down and out. But here's what I love about this story. It also shows us that Jesus is with the up and out. And this is good news. Jesus sees Zacchaeus, and Zacchaeus wasn't a poor guy. And Zacchaeus wasn't a person with no opportunities. And Jesus sees him, and he calls him out, and he says, I'm going to your house. And the whole crowd just moans. They just moan. They're like, Jesus is going to the house of a notorious sinner. And it made the crowd mad. Why? Because Jesus is supposed to be for the losers. And instead, he's going to the guy who's got the most. I love Jesus. You cannot pin him down, you know. Just as soon as you think he's for this one person over here and only this one person, he'll show you he's for the other person, you know. Jesus is for the up and out. He wants to go to Zacchaeus' house. By the way, Zacchaeus probably had a big house. Jesus is comfortable with the down and out, but he's also comfortable with the up and out. And so this morning, I just want to talk to you this morning for a second. There's probably some people in the room this morning, and you're rich, and you're doing really, really well, and you're stable, and you might even be powerful, and maybe you're the leader at your company, and maybe you're the boss, and a lot of people do what you say, and you've got more than you need. Here's what I want to tell you this morning. The thing that you're really looking for, even after everything you already have, is Jesus. Zacchaeus had everything. He had everything that money could buy, and the thing that was missing in his life, the thing that was the desperate ache of his own heart was the Son of God, Jesus Christ. Chances are that's why you're here. So if you're rich this morning, I just want you to know you can add another zero to your bank account. You can continue to win in business, and I'll give you a high five, but it will never scratch the itch. The itch will only be scratched by Jesus. The desperate ache of your heart will only be filled by the Son of God. And then when Jesus comes over, Zacchaeus makes this bold statement. He says, Jesus, I'm going to give half of everything I have away to the poor. And if I've cheated anybody on their taxes, I'm going to give it back to them 4 times over. This is an example of disruption. Disruption. There's something about the presence of Jesus that's profoundly disrupting. How many of you know that if Jesus comes to your house, something's going to change? Yeah. And Jesus even says what it is that came to Zacchaeus' house. He says, salvation has come to this house, right? He's a true son of Abraham. And this is why I've come. That's what Jesus says. And so part of what we see in this end bit is that salvation is disruption. Salvation is things change. The presence of Jesus is going to move something around in our life. Jesus will come to your house. Jesus might even invite himself to your house. Jesus may come to your life. By the way, in the Bible, anytime we're talking about the house, we're talking about the wholeness of your life. You know, the house is always a metaphor for your whole life. So Jesus will come to your house. He wants to be a guest in your house. And when he comes, something will change. If the presence of Jesus shows up in this room like it did in worship, and we're continually exposed to the presence of Jesus, I can promise you this: the more we lean into the presence of Jesus and the more we invite him into our lives, the more that Jesus will eventually propagate some sort of change. There will be disruption. And so the question this morning is, what is the presence of Jesus disrupting in my life? Has anything changed? Maybe we could say it this way. Think about your life over the last 5 years. Has anything in your life over the last 5 years changed because of the presence of Jesus? I see some heads in here going, yeah. Okay, I was at the summit last night, and during ministry time, I got a chance to pray for this precious lady. And she said, hey, I need to tell you a secret. I said, okay. And so she tells me a secret, and I won't tell you guys what it is. It's a secret. She tells me a secret. She's only told 2 other people this in her entire life, right? And I'm so touched because this precious lady has let following Jesus disrupt her life. She gave up something tremendous 7 years ago and has never looked back. And even today, it causes her some pain. But she's like, Jesus is worth it. You know? I was so moved. Why? Because that's what the gospel looks like. The gospel looks like disruption. Something is going to change. And by the way, it's always for the better. It's always for the better. Something's going to change. Zacchaeus lived one way. He meets Jesus, and all of a sudden, everything begins to move. He begins to move. Jesus is for the desperate. Jesus is for the down and out, but Jesus is also for the up and out. And salvation means disruption. Amen? Hey, here's what